If you are, and through the first conversation all the way to the end, can be very clear and very transparent in what your objective is, and your partner knows that, that is a fundamental component to having a successful long-term partnership. Good afternoon. My name is Brennan Loh. I lead Shopify's business development group, and super excited to be part of this series, partnership negotiations. It's something I've been doing at Shopify since the day I left school, and which was over 5 years ago now, when Shopify was about 30 people in a small, tiny office in Ottawa. Today we're now 1,200 people in 4 offices with over 250,000 customers in 150 different countries. And the art of the deal, partnership negotiations, is actually pretty fascinating to me because it's really not something that's often taught. Right? You know, it's something that you kind of learn by messing up a lot and realizing that it sucks so much you're not going to do it again the next time, and you do that again and again and again until you're like, master at it, or so you think. But I want to actually, through the lens of this presentation, talk more so about the early days of Shopify, because what's actually kind of cool about a really high-growth company like Shopify is partnerships meant something completely different to Shopify 3 or 4 years ago than they do today. Today, we're a public company. We have connections into just about every executive in Silicon Valley. We have investors that are able to introduce us to really key prominent people. So it's kind of a different game. But I do really fondly enjoy the times that I had when we were in our first year. I was in my first year at Shopify. No one knew who we were. Nobody knew our industry even existed. And it made it that much more fun as a startup to go after people from a kind of hustle and just straight effort perspective. And that's kind of some of the things I want to share because I think they're more relatable than in kind of today's context. So startup struggles. I mean, as a startup, it's quite obvious what you're facing. At the end of the day, it's finite resources, right? It's time and money. Really, the key in running a startup is growth, right? If growth is not the first thing on your mind, if that's not the only thing on your mind, you have to reprioritize things because growth should be the only thing you're thinking about as a startup. And as a result, that kind of opens up options, right? And there's always options, but for startups, there's actually limited options and compared to a company like Shopify today. And what do I mean by that in your pursuit of growth? Well, what I mean by that is typically in the pursuit of growth, you can achieve that through building, through buying, or through partnering, right? You can build the thing that you need to build yourself to accelerate your product. You can buy someone who has that IP that you may need to accelerate your roadmap, or you could potentially partner, which is kind of cheating in a good way, and you take a bit of a shortcut with a partner to get to where you want to be eventually. But realistically, as a startup, you don't have the opportunity to buy, right? You just don't have that resource of money. So you're looking at build versus partner. So why partner, right? The way that I've looked at partnering is, again, it's a shortcut to achieving both partners' goals, right? And the goals should either be one of two things, in my opinion. It should be a distribution goal, so you're trying to acquire more customers as quickly as possible, or it should be a product enhancement, in that you feel that with your limited resources, you're actually able to partner with someone as opposed to starting a build from the ground up, right? So looking at why partner should be answering one of those two questions, but it should really be in pursuit of growth and acceleration. Because if you think about the opportunities of pursuing growth or growing your product through a partner, the one thing you're not doing is sacrificing the ability for you to delight your customers, right? So when you think about partnering, are you sacrificing the ability to delight your customers? Is this actually going to make you take a sidestep in your business in your pursuit of growth? If the answer is yes, it's going to make you have to detract and take another priority, then again, maybe you shouldn't be partnering, maybe you should be considering building and or delaying until that is not on the table, because again, growth is key here. So what makes for a successful partnership? TechCrunch. That's not actually true. But I don't actually think that, and I have actually a separate story I'll get into in a second with TechCrunch and press releases, but I actually think that the decision of what makes a good partnership really comes down to clarity and transparency from both parties. If you are, and through the first conversation all the way to the end, can be very clear and very transparent in what your objective is, and your partner knows that, That is a fundamental component to having a successful long-term partnership. So this is a kind of a myth that I think needs to be debunked, because I actually really don't believe in that, and that is negotiations have a single winner and a single loser. And I don't believe that's true at all, because the idea is if you are going into a partnership, you have to live with the consequences. What you decide at the state of negotiation, you have to be comfortable with throughout the entire period of your partnership. Now, at Shopify today, I actually have the benefit as a really big company of throwing somebody into a partnership negotiation and absolutely ruining the other party. Right? Going on a phone call and using our weight, using our leverage, saying, you need us more than you. And then I have the benefit of actually putting someone else in the conversation afterwards to take care of the relationship and maybe mend some of the wounds that happened. Right? But as a startup, you don't have that privilege, because those two hats are likely worn by the same person. Right? So if you think about a partnership negotiation and you're going in there with the intent to kill, which is not the right intent, then guess what? You have to be comfortable the next day also going back to that same partner with open arms, reminding them that you're partners. Doesn't work that way, right? There is not a single winner and a single loser here. They both work in conjunction. You can both win here. I really recommend a book, actually, if you want to take a note. This is probably one of my favorite books on partnerships and negotiations. It's called The Opposable Mind. It's written by Roger Martin, and he is a fantastic author who basically carries the idea of integrative thinking through. So integrative thinking is basically the idea of holding two conflicting ideas in constructive tension. So I'm going to read this out because I'll otherwise completely butcher it, but he says it actually really well in the book. And it's the predisposition and capacity to hold two diametrically opposing ideas in your head without panicking or settling, and instead producing a synthesis that is superior to each individual option. In short, 1 + 1 = 3. It's not one idea versus the other idea. It's the idea that this is what I value, and this is what my partner values. How do we get to something that is either going to be not just a compromise, but accelerating both of our value equations, or don't partner? And if you can hold that entire thought, that entire perspective together in one consideration, you're in a really good place. So going back to that whole press release, there's actually, I heard this from someone on our PR team, and I thought this was actually really interesting, because a lot of people consider partnerships as the sum of what occurs at the point that the partnership is disclosed. So what happens, what hits TechCrunch on the front page of TechCrunch, right? If you aren't really clear in what it is you want out of a partnership, or you're thinking that what you want out of a partnership isn't necessarily clear to yourself, actually do this exercise. Write the press release you want to see for your partnership the day it hits the front page of TechCrunch. Like, write it out as if it was a press release, and you're super stoked to wake up and see this on the front page of TechCrunch, right? Because what you put in the press release is subconsciously what you actually want from a value standpoint out of the deal, right? That's a very truthful, honest exercise for yourself if you're able to put it out on paper. And from that, if you compare what you wrote down on that piece of paper to what your partner thinks you want from a value standpoint, and you see a huge gap, you have a problem. You have to start getting honest with your partner, because you're all of a sudden, come the time to discuss your negotiation and your partnership and what it's going to and how it's going to appear to the media, if those things don't align, then you're in a really awkward place a couple days before your deal is supposed to be published, right? So get honest with yourself, figure out what that value is. So let's go back to the opposable mind analogy for a second. You have two conflicting ideas, one of those ideas being your value, and the other now being the partner value. So how do you figure out what it is that your partner values? Well, you have two options. Number one, you ask them, what is it that you value? But if you don't have that option, you have to do research. And frankly, good research, is the unbelievable hidden advantage in all of this. If you can figure out what your partner wants, actually great, another side tip, if you can figure out what it takes to get your partner on the other side promoted as an individual, you're doing really well. If you can find more value for them than for yourself, if you can find more value for them than yourself, you're actually in a really good place. That sounds kind of weird. Why would I do that, right? Well, if you're actually able to hit your goal and you're able to get what you want out of the deal, who cares how much value you give them, right? Makes you look like a hero, though. Partnership doesn't die the next week. You get to ride that wave out, right? So how do you discover what value exists for your partner before they even tell you? Every year, Shopify runs a Build a Business competition. We started 5 years ago. It's basically a global entrepreneurship competition that encourages individuals and small businesses to start a business from scratch and win an amazing prize, sometimes cash, sometimes mentorship. In the past, we've partnered with really prolific mentors, entrepreneurs, Seth Godin, Gary Vaynerchuk, Eric Ries from the Lean Startup, a whole bunch of really cool people. Well, I was sitting on my couch watching Shark Tank, and I'm like, man, I really want to work with Mark Cuban. Like, I really want to work with Mark Cuban. This is 4 years ago, going back to the startup lessons. We were nobody to Mark Cuban. Why is this image important? 4.68 million followers? That's actually not why it's important. That's actually the benefit that comes if I can figure out why a relationship is important to Mark, right? Because I didn't know what Mark wanted in a potential relationship with Shopify. He's a billionaire. He's like worth $3 billion. He sold AudioNet. He sold Broadcast.com to Yahoo for several billion dollars in the late 90s. He's a billionaire, right? If I give him $50,000 cash, he'd wipe his ass with $50. Like, he doesn't need money, right? So it's like, God, I can't ask Mark. I didn't have the contacts. I couldn't call Mark. So I had to research. Well, hard to research what a billionaire wants. Trying to buy Christmas presents, think you have a problem. So here's what I did. I combined the two, ask and research. What's interesting about this photo, the number of followers, or how many people he's following. Here's the thing about celebrities. They follow three kinds of people. They follow other celebrities, they follow the brands that they work with or they're told to follow, and they follow the people that are super close to them. So what did I do? I did some research. I clicked, we figured out who is he following, and felt like it wasn't a tedious exercise for me to go through 1,000 people, and I stumbled upon this guy. His name is Michael Johnston, and his bio, as it reads, is he is the head of technology for the Mark Cuban companies. Haha, bingo, right? A little bit of research, I found Mark Cuban's right-hand man when it came to tech. So I reached out to Michael, who's much, much easier to talk to than Mark, and was like, hey, Michael, what's going on? Let's talk. I built a relationship. I built a relationship for 6 months with this guy, because I knew I couldn't just come out and make the ask. And eventually, I got to use him to figure out what Mark wants. What's important to you, Michael, so I can get you a promotion, right? What's important to Mark, who has everything, he's a billionaire? What's important to Mark's businesses? And he actually said something that was really interesting. I didn't expect it. He basically said that Mark is not only in the business of sport as the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, but he looks at business as a sport. Mark just wants to wake up every day and kick your ass. He doesn't care if he has a better billion-dollar company than you. He doesn't care if he wins the million-dollar deal over you. He doesn't care if he has a better lemonade stand than you. He just wants to beat you. Interesting, right? So I'm organizing an entrepreneurship competition, and I just have to find a way to get Mark to win at business. That's my second Mars talk. I'm not going to talk about that pitch today, but it worked. We got Mark for free in the competition. Okay, a deal ends with a handshake. Myth, false. Right? I hate this statement so much. If you're a salesperson, yeah, that probably makes sense for you to take your commission and have a steak dinner. If you are in partnerships, that is absolutely absurd. A deal does not end with a handshake, it starts with a handshake, right? Because, again, you went through the entire negotiation process. You have to live with whatever it is that you do. A deal starts with a handshake. So, we talked about all of these ideas. I now have the knowledge that I have what I value, what my partner values. I have to figure out how to blend those together. In come the negotiations, right? Well, not really. Like, negotiations are really just a value equation that you're trying to piece together. And if you think about it from the idea of the very first slide of TechCrunch, as your goal is to get onto the front page of TechCrunch, you're doing it for the wrong reasons, right? It's a value creation exercise. So a really good partnership is not about the splash that it makes, but it's the ability to create value. And often, really big value doesn't just come out of thin air. It comes from a series of small wins that grow in size until they become super, super relevant. In late last year, Shopify announced a partnership with Uber, which was hailed as a really disruptive thing for the entire logistics industry. We were able to partner with Uber to offer same-day delivery within 2 hours of you buying something from a Shopify merchant in major metros like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. It was crazy. It was like all over the news. Every press and media outlet covered it. But the thing that people don't know about that is it actually started as a lot of value had already been created by the time that had gone out. It wasn't us celebrating a handshake. It was us celebrating the fact that we had already created a ton of value for people. Well, what do I mean by that? 8 months earlier, we had invited Uber, 2 folks that we knew through easy connections, to say, hey, come to the office and let's hack on this idea that wouldn't it be cool if, you're in Toronto, I'm from Ottawa, we don't have this yet, but Uber Eats, right? Uber Eats gets some food from the Uber guy on a little menu. Wouldn't it be cool if we hacked that and basically said, well, we have all these UberX drivers driving around the city. What if they went and picked up a package and delivered it within a certain radius and were able to do it for like $5? That would be pretty cool. And actually created Uber Rush with Shopify in 48 hours. We hacked it completely together. We created value. We accelerated that value to the point where both companies were like, yes, this is exactly the direction that we want to go in. And then that finally, 8 months later, became what was this massive announcement. My point is, as a startup, don't chase the home run. If you're familiar with baseball, bunt singles, walks, they're just as important. They get people on base, right? A home run is not the only way to score a run. Okay, small win snowball. Also, if you are convinced that I'm wrong, and big wins are the only win, there are infinite case studies to show that this is not the truth. Square, Starbucks, launched a partnership in 2012, which was hailed as this unbelievable blockbuster partnership for retail and a startup, right? Square, Jack Dorsey leaves Twitter, goes and starts Square. No one's really heard of it. He, in 2012, partners with Starbucks, agrees to do all of the processing for every Starbucks location in the US for a period of 4 years. Starbucks is going to invest in the company. Howard Schultz is going to sit on the board of Square. It was amazing. On paper, it read as one of the best partnerships ever. 3.5 years later, Square is trying to IPO. They submit their S1 to the SEC, and it's revealed that that deal cost Square $71 million. $71 million it cost them on a bad deal. It was also a deal that was meant to show that Square could handle the enterprise. Square hadn't signed up any other enterprise businesses after that deal was launched, right? So at what cost? If you are convinced that you are pursuing partnerships for the sake of making a big splash, and that is your strategy, consider the cost. At what cost is this going to come? It's going to come potentially in the cost of resources. Those things, again, go full circle here, right? Time and money. Or is it going to cost you financially to the tune of $71 million, right? So if you take all of these lessons, I think partnerships negotiations are a task. I think what we really should be talking about is mindful negotiations. Are you mindful that you continue to hold the right to delight your customers? Are you mindful that your goal should be to accelerate your growth, accelerate your roadmap? Are you mindful that partnerships need to see value? They are long-terms, they are not just handshakes. And if you do, you're set.